Welcome back, everybody, to the deep dive.
Yeah.
Today, we are diving into a topic that I think is near and dear to pretty much everybody's hearts,
It's a good one.
and that's habits.
Yes.
We are going to be looking at the book Atomic Habits by James Clear,
It's a good one.
which is all about the power of tiny changes.
Yeah. And how they can really build up to something amazing.
Exactly. And our mission today is to go through this book and see what kind of actionable insights we can glean from it about how habits work and how we can improve them.
Yeah, it's really about understanding the science behind habit formation and how to actually put it into practice.
Right, so let's start with James Clear himself.
Okay.
This guy has a really interesting story.
Yeah, he does. He starts the book off by sharing his personal story, and it's not your typical self-help kind of thing.
No, not at all. This is,
It's pretty intense.
yeah, this is a guy who basically had this, really, really bad baseball injury in college.
Yeah, shattered his arm, I think. Like multiple broken bones.
Yeah, it was a really bad injury, and he had to, relearn how to do everything.
Oh yeah, like basic functions. Eating and dressing himself.
Yeah, so he kind of had to build himself back up from scratch.
And that's where he discovered this whole idea of atomic habits. These small, incremental changes that can lead to massive results over time.
Right, it's like compound interest, but applied to personal growth.
Exactly. And, what's really inspiring is that he didn't just apply this to his physical recovery.
Yeah.
He used these same principles to excel in his academics.
And he ended up building his own business.
Oh, yeah. And then he even used it to write the book itself. So it's like a testament to the power of this whole approach.
Absolutely. So for those of us who are maybe not recovering from a devastating injury, where do we even begin with building these atomic habits?
Well, Clear breaks it down into this really clear 4-stage pattern that he calls the habit loop.
Okay, I like this habit loop idea.
Yeah, it's easy to remember.
Yeah, so walk us through the loop.
All right, so it starts with a cue. And the cue is basically anything that triggers your brain to initiate a behavior.
Okay, so like a reminder or a signal.
Exactly, like think about our ancestors.
Yeah.
Back in the day, a cue might have been like the smell of ripe fruit, which signaled food is available.
Right. And now?
But in our modern world, cues are more like, the notification ding on your phone or that little red dot on an app icon.
And I'm sure a lot of us have been conditioned to respond to those cues.
Oh, absolutely. And that takes us to the next stage, which is the craving. This is the motivational force behind the habit.
Okay, so it's not just about the cue, it's about what that cue makes you want.
Right, so you see that notification and boom, you're craving the reward. Whether it's, that hit of dopamine from seeing a funny meme or that sense of connection from chatting with a friend.
And that craving leads to the response, which is the actual habit itself.
Right, you pick up your phone, you open the app, you start scrolling.
And then, of course, there's the reward, which is the satisfying outcome that reinforces the habit.
Right, so that's the feeling of pleasure or entertainment or relief or whatever it is that makes the habit worth repeating.
And that reward basically solidifies the entire loop, making you more likely to do it all over again the next time the cue pops up.
Exactly. It's like this self-perpetuating cycle. And the thing is, this framework is super useful because it helps you understand why you do the things you do.
Yeah.
You're not just some willpower robot trying to fight urges all day.
Yeah, there's a whole neurological process happening there.
Exactly. There's a reason behind those behaviors.
So this whole idea of compound interest that we talked about earlier, Clear makes this really powerful point about how time magnifies even the smallest choices.
Yeah, he says that those tiny gains or losses that we make every day can lead to dramatically different outcomes over the long term. It's like you're either following a path of slow and steady growth or a path of gradual decline. And the difference between those two paths becomes huge over a decade or two.
So for those of you listening right now, what are some of those small habits that make up your day? What if we zoom out and look at how they might be shaping your future self? It could be something as simple as going for a walk every day or reading for 15 minutes before bed.
Or even just spending a little less than you earn each month. Those seemingly insignificant choices can really add up over time.
Okay, so now that we have a basic understanding of the habit loop, let's talk about how to actually break bad habits.
All right, so this is where things get a little tricky. Most of us try to rely on willpower alone to resist temptation.
Oh yeah, just white knuckle it.
Exactly. But Clear argues that a more effective approach is to actually invert the 4 laws of behavior change.
Okay, I'm intrigued by this inversion thing. So instead of trying to resist the urge head on, you make the bad habit harder to even start.
Exactly. You make it invisible, unattractive, difficult and unsatisfying.
So you're basically engineering your environment to make it easier to make good choices.
Exactly, and he gives some great examples like, if you're trying to cut back on snacking, don't even keep tempting snacks in your house.
Make them invisible.
Right out of sight, out of mind.
And what about if you're trying to watch less TV?
Unplug it after each use, or put the remote in a drawer. Make it a little bit of an effort to turn it on.
So it's not about fighting the craving, it's about changing the game entirely.
Exactly, you're removing the triggers that set off that whole habit loop.
And this whole idea that our environment shapes our behavior more than we realize is something Clear really emphasizes throughout the book.
Yeah, he uses this fascinating example of how Japanese factories were redesigned to boost efficiency simply by placing tools and materials in more strategic locations. Like they literally made it easier for workers to do their jobs just by changing the layout of the workspace.
And he also talks about the power of visual cues. Like, have you ever noticed how having a bowl of candy sitting out on the counter just begs you to eat it?
Totally. It's like those cookies are calling your name.
Exactly. It's a reminder that even small changes to your surroundings can have a surprisingly big impact on your choices.
Yeah, so think about your own space. Are there any little tweaks you could make to make good habits easier and bad habits harder? Maybe it's as simple as putting your workout clothes by the door or leaving a book on your bedside table instead of your phone.
Okay, let's get a little geeky for a minute and talk about dopamine.
All right, let's do it.
So Clear dives into the neuroscience of habits and explains how dopamine, this neurochemical, plays a major role in our motivation and reward system.
What's really fascinating is that dopamine isn't just released when we experience something pleasurable, but also when we anticipate it. So it's that anticipation that really gets us hooked and keeps us coming back for more.
It's like our brains are hardwired to chase those dopamine hits, even if the actual reward isn't all that great.
Yeah, and this is something that, the food industry has really figured out how to exploit. They create these hyper-palatable, dopamine-spiking foods that basically hijack our natural reward system.
It's like those foods are engineered to make us crave them, even when we know they're not good for us.
Exactly. So being aware of this dopamine-driven feedback loop is key, especially when you're trying to break those unhealthy eating patterns. Once you understand how it works, you can start to identify the cues and cravings that are driving your behavior, and then you can come up with strategies to manage them.
One of the biggest hurdles we all face when trying to build good habits is this tendency to prioritize instant gratification over long-term rewards. It's why bad habits are so hard to break, because the costs are usually delayed while the benefits are immediate.
Right. It's like choosing between a small reward today and a much larger reward in the future, and most of the time our brains are going to opt for that instant gratification.
So how do we overcome that?
Well, a clear solution is to make those good habits more immediately satisfying. Find ways to bridge that gap between effort and reward.
So it's about adding those little celebrations to the healthy choices you make.
Exactly. It could be something as simple as enjoying a piece of dark chocolate after a workout or taking a relaxing bath after a long day of work. It's about associating those good habits with something pleasurable so they don't feel like such a chore.
He also talks about using habit trackers as a visual reminder of your progress. There's something really motivating about seeing that chain of successful days. It gives you a sense of accomplishment and keeps you focused on the long game.
Totally. And it's a great way to leverage those small wins to keep yourself going.
And what about accountability partners?
Oh yeah, having someone to check in on you and hold you accountable can be a game changer. It's much harder to back out on a commitment when you know someone's going to call you out on it.
Right, and Clear even suggests creating a habit contract where you set specific consequences for yourself if you fail to follow through.
Oh yeah, like donating to a charity you dislike or posting your failure on social media. It's about increasing your level of commitment and making it harder to slip up.
So beyond the mechanics of habit formation, Clear gets into this really interesting idea of finding habits that align with your natural abilities and interests. He says that you're more likely to stick with habits that play to your strengths and passions.
Right. He encourages you to think about your genes, your personality, and your environment when choosing which habits to focus on. It's about playing a game that favors your strengths, rather than trying to force yourself to be good at everything.
It's about finding that sweet spot where your efforts feel more like a joyful pursuit than a chore.
Exactly. And even when you found those ideal habits, those things that come naturally to you, there's still the challenge of staying motivated over the long haul And that's where Clear introduces this concept of the Goldilocks rule.
Okay, so this sounds like it's all about finding that perfect balance.
Exactly. It's about finding that sweet spot of challenge where you're pushing yourself just enough to stay engaged and motivated, but not so much that you get overwhelmed and give up.
It's about staying in that Goldilocks zone.
Exactly. All right, so let's dig a little deeper into this Goldilocks rule and how it applies to building lasting habits.
Yeah, because it sounds like it's not just about finding the right habits, but also about finding the right level of challenge within those habits.
Exactly. According to Claire, we experience that peak motivation when we're working on tasks that are right on the edge of our current abilities. Not too easy, not too hard, but just right.
It's like that feeling of being in the flow, where you're totally absorbed in what you're doing and time just seems to fly by.
Exactly. And when we hit that sweet spot, we're more likely to stick with it because it's both challenging and rewarding.
So how do we actually find that Goldilocks zone for our own habits?
Well, Clear suggests that one way is to break down your goals into smaller, more manageable steps. Instead of trying to tackle this huge, overwhelming goal, start with something small and achievable that you can build on over time.
So it's like that whole idea of atomic habits again.
Exactly. It's about making those incremental improvements that add up over time.
And as you start to master those smaller steps, you can gradually increase the difficulty or complexity to keep yourself challenged and engaged.
Right. It's about finding that balance between pushing yourself and setting yourself up for success.
And this whole idea of finding the right level of challenge, it's not just about motivation either, it's also about avoiding boredom, which Clear argues is one of the biggest threats to our long-term success.
Oh yeah. He says that as habits become more automatic, they can lose that initial excitement. We can get stuck in a rut just going through the motions without feeling that same sense of satisfaction.
It's like when you first start a new workout routine, it's all exciting and you're seeing those gains. But after a while, it can become just another item on your to-do list.
Totally. And this is where deliberate practice comes in again. It's about finding ways to keep things interesting, even when the habit itself has become somewhat routine. Can you tweak your routine? Set some new goals. Find ways to challenge yourself and push your skills further.
So it's not about just doing the same thing over and over again. It's about finding ways to keep growing and evolving.
Exactly. And it might involve stepping outside your comfort zone a little bit, trying new things, experimenting with different approaches. And most importantly, it's about embracing those moments of failure as opportunities to learn and improve.
Because failure is inevitable, right?
Oh yeah. We're all going to mess up. We're all going to have those days where we fall off track. But it's about how we respond to those setbacks that really matters.
So it's not about being perfect, it's about being persistent.
Exactly. And it's about having that growth mindset, that belief that you can always learn and improve, and that setbacks are just part of the process.
And Clear also talks about this really cool idea of using implementation intentions to increase your chances of following through with your habits.
Oh yeah, this is a great strategy. It's basically about creating a specific plan for when and where you're going to perform a habit. Like instead of just saying, I'm going to exercise more, you say, I'm going to go for a run every morning at 7 a.m. in the park.
So you're removing that element of decision fatigue. You're not having to decide whether or not you're going to do it. You've already made the decision.
Exactly. You're just following the plan.
Right.
And it also helps to create that mental association between a specific time and place and the habit you want to perform.
So it's like setting yourself up for success.
Totally. And another strategy that Claire recommends is habit stacking, which is basically about linking a new habit to an existing one. So for example, if you want to start meditating, you might do it right after you brush your teeth in the morning.
So you're piggybacking on that existing habit.
Exactly. You're using the momentum of that existing behavior to trigger the new one.
And over time, that new habit becomes integrated into your routine.
Right. It becomes just another part of your day.
So it sounds like building lasting habits is really about creating a system that supports those habits.
Yep.
It's about making them obvious, attractive, easy, and satisfying.
Exactly. And it's about finding ways to stay motivated and engaged over the long haul. Whether it's by setting challenging goals, tracking your progress, finding an accountability partner, or just embracing the boredom of mastery. It's about creating a lifestyle that supports the person you want to become. So we've talked about finding that Goldilocks zone for motivation, right? That sweet spot where the challenge is just right, but Clear doesn't stop there. He also digs into this really fascinating idea of how to make those challenging tasks, well, actually more enjoyable.
That sounds almost impossible.
I know, right?
Mm-hmm.
But he uses this great example of how Olympic athletes actually reframe those pre-game jitters. Those nerves that most people would see as anxiety.
Yeah.
They choose to see it as excitement. They're literally flipping the script in their minds.
So it's like that whole power of positive thinking thing.
Yeah, but it's more than just thinking positive. It's about actively shifting your perspective and channeling that nervous energy into something productive.
So instead of letting those nerves cripple you, you're using them to fuel your performance.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's something we can all apply to our own lives. Whether you're about to give a big presentation or tackle a challenging project, try reframing those nerves as excitement and see how it changes your approach.
And even when you're not feeling that burst of excitement or motivation, Clear really emphasizes this point of showing up consistently regardless of your mood.
Oh yeah, he's got this great quote from an elite weightlifting coach who said, "At some point it comes down to who can handle the boredom of training every day doing the same lifts over and over and over."
Whoa, that's powerful.
It is right. It's a reminder that real mastery isn't always glamorous or exciting. It often involves embracing the repetition, the consistency, the dedication to honing your skills day after day.
So it's about falling in love with the process, not just the outcome.
Exactly. And it's important to remember that Clear isn't saying that every habit needs to be taken to that level of mastery. For some habits, good enough is perfectly fine.
Right, it's about prioritizing. We don't need to be constantly optimizing every single aspect of our lives. Focus on the habits that truly matter, the ones that have the biggest impact on your well-being and your goals.
Exactly. But for those areas where you really are striving for excellence, where you want to push beyond your limits and reach your full potential, that's where embracing that process of deliberate practice, continuously seeking improvement, that's where the magic happens.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into atomic habits, what are some of the key takeaways that our listeners can walk away with?
Well, I think one of the biggest ones is that small changes done consistently can lead to remarkable results. It's about understanding the science of habit formation, finding ways to make good habits easier and bad habits harder, and most importantly, embracing the power of those tiny gains over time.
It's not about finding some magic bullet or overnight solution. It's about building a system that supports your goals and then showing up day after day, even when you don't feel like it.
Exactly. And Clear's book provides such a practical framework for doing just that. It's full of actionable strategies and real-world examples that anyone can apply to their own lives.
So if you're ready to start making some positive changes in your life, we highly recommend checking out Atomic Habits. It's a game changer. And that's it for this episode of The Deep Dive.